I think we've reached a really, really interesting point in graphic design's evolution. And I've lived through two major changes in what it meant to be a graphic designer. And I think we're in the third one. First one was the arrival of the Apple Mac. Because before the Apple Mac, we did everything with our hands. Everything was mechanical. Some of you may even know about that. We made everything with our hands. Artwork was mechanical, it was physical. And that was a big deal. We had to learn to use this thing, and it was completely alien. And I remember I had a studio at the time. I'll talk a little bit about it in a minute. But and my partner, my business partner, came to me and she said, "I think we should get computerized." And this would be about 91, maybe 92. And I remember saying to him, "Oh, well, you know, the designers are very skilled craft, and I don't think computers are going to." But she's much smarter than me. She went off and she bought our first Apple Mac. It was a black screen, and it didn't take long for me to realize we had to convert. We had to forget the old ways of working. And that was a big thing. It was a big change. Clients viewed us differently. Everything changed. So that was one. The second big one was the arrival of the internet. Because up until then, designers, graphic designers, we controlled everything. When we sent something to print, we knew what was going to come back. We could specify the paper, we could go to the printers and see it on press. Suddenly there was this thing called the internet, and we didn't have control over it. It depended on what browser people looked at, or how their screen was calibrated. So that was another big change. Designers, control freaks mostly, had to loosen up, had to let things go, and I guess that was a big change. And as I said, I think we're in the third big change. Who knows, or who has a view on what that might be? What's happening to design now that will be cataclysmic, or is being, get my tenses right? It's a big deal.
Automation.
Yeah. Who said that? Yeah. Yeah. I think we're entering a phase where huge areas of design will be automated. In a kind of way, it's happening already with, Sarah mentioned Facebook. Facebook is, imagine what you would have to do to communicate with people if you didn't have Facebook, if we didn't have social media. And I think we're going, and you can argue that that's not strictly automation, although it has automated part of the design process. But I'll just tell you one brief indication that there are things going on in this area. But my personal experience of it is a guy came to see me, and he's a computer scientist. And at some point in his life, he'd worked in, I think, advertising. And he is working on a system that will allow clients, and that's the key, he will allow clients to issue verbal commands to a computer terminal, which will then, in real time, produce iterations of what the client thinks they want. And now this doesn't exist yet. He's got some of the way towards that, and he wanted someone to advise him on design. And I actually turned him down, although I was fascinated, but I turned him down, not really for, well, partly for sort of ethical reasons, but I had other reasons for doing it. But it is coming. A lot of the things that we do, a lot of the skills that you guys have acquired, that I've acquired, won't be needed in the future. And I can say this with certainty, that nobody in this room will be doing the same thing now that they will be doing in 10 years' time. Absolute certainty. The world is changing so fast, so rapidly, and so profoundly that none of us can be confident that we'll be doing the same thing in 10 years' time. So that's a kind of pessimism. Maybe people see that as a pessimistic view. I don't. I'm optimistic because I think a design mentality, a design sensibility, a design brain is actually a very good piece of equipment to deal with accelerated change. I think actually designers, most designers, are actually really well equipped to deal with a world of constant change. And one of the things that, I've come to the conclusion of is that as designers, we are actually capable of doing more than just being designers at the end of the phone or at the end of an email, executing our clients' wishes. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. I don't do a lot of it these days, but I still do it, and it's absolutely necessary. But I wonder if, as automation becomes an everyday reality, we're all going to have to see which of our skills are transferable. How can we move and expand beyond the notion of just being a service-based designer? So that's the kind of the background to my talk. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a bit about how personally I've navigated that, I don't know what you call it, change, navigated that inevitability. And my route was has been to become a publisher. And if you think about it, it's actually quite a short step from being all designers are publishers anyway, it's just that we don't own the material we publish. But maybe we could. Maybe we can own it. So anyway, I'm going to tell you a little bit about who and what I am. I mentioned I had a design company. I had a design company called Intro, which I was co-founder of and creative director for 15 years. And it was absolutely fantastic. I wouldn't have missed a day of it. But my God, it was hard work. You know, get in at 8 and leave at midnight for years and years and years. And I kind of got to the point where I thought, do I really want to keep doing this? We started off doing music work. This is Primal Scream. People know Primal Scream? Everybody know? They were some of the best clients, maybe even the best clients we ever had. They were absolutely fantastic to work for. We wanted to drop the vowels from this, and the record company said, no, you can't do that. You can't spell our band's name properly. But we just had a word with them, and they said, no, we like it. They took a lot of drugs, which sometimes made dealing with them tricky. But they were the nicest people. We'd always have a conversation about drugs. They'd always have to tell us what they would be into. And this was a kind of, this was done in '98, and this was a sort of pivotal moment for us because this was an album campaign for Depeche Mode, and the idea was we had these LED units, which we had 6 of them, and there was enough money then in the record business to go to the States, send a small team to the States, and shoot this stuff. And I remember when we came back from it, the label guy said, that will never happen again. And because things like Napster had started and the record business was going through a big change, and it's, you know, to a certain extent, it was feeling the change. Another example of how change forces new types of behavior. So this idea that they could give a small design group a very large sum of money to do that is sort of just unthinkable now. A lot of the work was art direction based, working with photographers, and as I said, this sort of slightly came to an end. And we did other things. We moved on beyond record designing record sleeves and record campaigns. But one of the things that happened to me was I became interested in the late '90s, early 2000s in this kind of the design discourse that was going on at the time. And I also had this. I'd started to write. I'd become interested in writing, and I also felt that there was one book that was kind of missing in the design library, if you like. And that was a book that really just kind of told the truth. What was it really like? Because you'd read interviews with successful designers and it all sounded great. It all sounded as if nothing ever went wrong. But we know stuff goes wrong, goes badly wrong. What do you do when you get your work rejected? So I wanted to write a book that really tried as much as possible to tell the truth. So I gave up studio life. I left and I wrote this book. And that kind of marked a sort of end point for me. I thought that's my kind of professional design service-based life. That's a kind of full stop on it. And then, as I mentioned, I've become really interested in the discourse that was going on around design in the 90s, which really became quite a big thing. You know, what are the ethical and what are the what's the real value of design? What are we doing as designers? And one of the places this debate was kind of most active on was the Design Observer website. So I got invited to write for Design Observer, and that was a really good discipline because it was a hugely successful blog at the time, and sometimes you would have 300 comments, and they were articulate, literate comments. And so the discourse became really rich. It became a really sort of dense discussion of what it meant to be a designer. And then, very strange, for a couple of years, maybe 3 years, I think, I actually had a radio program called Graphic Design on the radio. And this was on a radio station called Resonance FM. People know Resonance? Okay, check it out. It's absolutely fantastic. I think they've launched themselves as sort of the world's only art radio, but they put the strangest and most wonderful things on the radio. No advertising, and they used to give me an hour once a week to talk about graphic design on the radio. And one of the people I had on the show, as we radio people say, was this guy, a guy called Tony Brooke. And I don't think I'd ever even met Tony before, but our studios often were kind of lumped together. He was very active at the same time as I was. And I knew he was into music, so I asked him to come on the program and talk about music and design. And the thing I discovered about Tony was that he was this really strange thing. He was a graphic design collector. He collected graphic design. And he has still has, most absolutely amazing collection. This is Neue Grafik, which I'm sure some of you know. I think a full set of Neue Grafik is about, I don't know, 1,500 quid, something like that. If you can find it, he's got two sets. And he collects posters, rare Swiss and German, mostly Swiss and German posters. And the interesting thing about Tony was he'd also actually done some publishing. He'd produced these newspaper publications. This was his studio's work. This was a really good one. This was 50 designers' reading lists. And they'd done this in their studio as a kind of extra curriculum activity. And so I was really thinking hard about publishing, but he was actually doing it. So after this, we went to the pub after the radio show, and I said to him, I want to start a publishing company. And he said, that's funny, I want to start a publishing company. But this was 8 years ago now, 7, 8 years ago. And it was also another time of pivotal change, which just goes to show that wherever you stop the clock, there's this massive change. This was the moment when e-books kicked in and the iPad. And who was going to be buying books? Who was going to be making books when you could get everything electronically? And I went to see, people know where this is? Magma. Did somebody say Magma? Yeah, it's Magma. It's Magma in, I think this is the Covent Garden branch. And I know the guy who runs Magma. He's a very, very smart guy called Mark Varley. And he'd spotted, maybe 10 years before this, he'd spotted the fact that there was this new interest in books about design. And he set up Magma, and there was 3 stores. So this is, as I said, this is 2009 maybe, 2010. And I went to see Mark. I thought he's a good person to speak to. I said, Mark, I'm thinking of starting a publishing company. Tony's already got some experience. He's a brilliant designer. I want to write the books, and we think we can do it. And he said, don't do it. I said, why? Why not? And he said, because sales have really, really dipped. And I said, why? And he told me the reason. And I thought, yeah, that makes sense. Sorry to keep asking questions. Who can think why in about 2009, 10, people stopped buying design books? What happened then that caused people to stop? Everybody in this room actually knows the answer. What? Instagram? No. Well, social media played. It was just a little bit before the big social media, but yeah, there was something in that. Something amazing, something that everybody in this room uses and everybody takes for granted. it suddenly meant that Mark's business from having crowds of people in his shop buying, what? iPad? iPhone? I think probably played a part, but there's something else.
Amazon?
Played a big part, Amazon. Played a big part. People, what?
Kindle.
Who said Google? Yes, but what aspect of Google?
Search.
Yeah, search what though? Okay, okay. All right. It was the arrival of Google Images. Because now everybody in this room uses Google Images, but there was a time when it didn't exist. And so what happened was, advertising agencies, design groups, designers would when they were working on a project, they would go and buy 15 books. They'd come out with armfuls of books. That Mark suddenly woke up one day and realized people weren't doing that anymore. And it was because of the arrival of Google Images. And so everybody's kind of, all those factors came together, but Google Images was the one thing that, but I wasn't sure about this. I wasn't totally convinced. And because all the designers I knew still had books. And I went to see a friend of mine and I said, Google Images, everybody uses it, but does it mean you're going to stop buying books? And he said, no, because often you find stuff, you search the graphic design that you're interested in or the reference, but you never find it again. It disappears somehow, unless you're sort of completely anal and bookmark everything, and who does that? So I thought, yeah, no, hang on a minute, there's got to be something here. And every studio I went to visit, friends who ran studios, they always had this, they always had shelves and shelves of books. I said, I can't believe that that the book is completely dead. And I found this fantastic quote by Umberto Eco. He said, the book is like the spoon, scissors, the hammer, the wheel. Once invented, it cannot be improved. And I sort of felt that, yeah, you can see everything online. Yeah, you can search everything on Google Images. But actually, it's not as good as it is in a book. And we can argue about that. And I've spoken to web designers who shouted me down on that. But I'll maybe talk a bit more about that in a minute. But I still think for art and design, really important to stress that, art and design, the book is still a superior format. It's not superior in all respects. Who looks at a printed timetable for the trains or whatever? No. But for art and design, the printed book I think is so we thought, okay, let's do this mad thing. Let's start unit editions, books on graphic design for graphic designers by graphic designers. And this was another frustration because I'd worked for some, both Tony and I had worked for some mainstream publishers producing design books, and it had been torture. It had been really, really painful. We felt, maybe arrogantly, but we felt we knew what designers wanted. Publishers design books for the buyers in bookshops. So the book I showed you, How to Be a Graphic Designer, it's a typographic cover. I had to fight tooth and nail to get that to be a typographic cover. And the reason I had to fight was because the sales reps who take that book into the bookshops feel uncomfortable with a typographic cover. They want a picture on there. So I thought, let's just get rid of all that bullshit. Let's just clear all that out and do the books, and design them, and produce the content in the way that we wanted. So we did the usual thing. We created our identity, and this was our first book. It's a book called Studio Culture, and it was. So we kind of in a way did everything wrong. We had a paper cover, and we had three different. It's the same book, but three different colours. So you could choose your colour. And a very nice publisher. In fact, the publisher who published the book I showed you earlier, he said, "Oh, I'll distribute it for you." And we said, "Oh, that's great, thank you." We printed. I can't believe I'm saying this. We printed 10,000 copies, and it nearly wiped us out on day one. Absolutely, nearly wiped us out. In many ways, it did wipe us out, but because we'd self-funded this, and we realised that if you go through the book trade, if you use the book distribution networks, you are way, way down the pecking order. And distribution is a huge issue in any field. How do you get the stuff that you make? How do you get it into the hands of people? And the book system is a system of sales reps who travel around the country going into bookshops and places like Amazon. They take an order, maybe it's a good order, maybe it's not. Months later, you get most of the books back, and you also don't get the money that you expect. So we realized this would just not, we couldn't survive doing this. If you're going to work in this method, you have to be a big, rich publisher with lots of money. So we thought, okay, maybe there's another way to do this. Maybe irony of ironies, let's use the internet to sell printed books. So we set up our first website. I think this is it. And we made it so that the only place you could buy our books was from our website. And we started to produce books on a really, important scale. And then we'd do things like, we'd try and make the website into a design destination. So we'd have posts, articles about the people that we were publishing. And then this was our second book. It's a book called. Most of the books I'm going to show you tonight are sold out. So I'm not a sales rep for unit editions. Not all of them. And this was the second book we published. This is a book about something called supergraphics, and there really is a thing called supergraphics. And it's where, this is an example of supergraphics, it's where, we didn't know this when we started. We just saw a lot of really interesting work being done on walls and on buildings, and we thought there's something really interesting happening here. But we discovered in the 1960s there was a thing called supergraphics. And supergraphics is, if I paint this wall, if I paint something on this wall, that's a mural. But if I go onto the ceiling and round the corner, that's supergraphics. So we looked at supergraphics from the 1960s. This is a contemporary one here. This is a really good example of supergraphics. The surface that they're applied to does not contain it. And there's some really, really interesting work. And that book, fantastic. We found a way of surviving. We printed 2,000 copies, and we sold 2,000 copies online. So we'd found a way of. But there's a nice irony in that in order to survive by designing, publishing, editing physical books, we needed the internet to do it. Couldn't have done it otherwise. I think this was number 3 or 4. This is a book about Total Design, wonderful Dutch design group, really, really influential, very important European design group. Wim Kruil was one of the founders. And again, we could do things like we could have this 3/4 paper wrap. All the stuff that if we were dealing with a mainstream publisher, it would be no, you can't do that. And here's some of the Total Design work. They were real pioneers in Europe of. They weren't the first, but they were major kind of pioneers for identity design, what we call branding today. And wonderful expressive stuff. And again, suddenly we realized this was selling really, really well. And what was interesting was, because it's the internet and because it's sent out through the post system, we get orders from Vietnam, we get orders from Chile. And suddenly, the world really is your oyster. So we knew we had a formula that worked. And this is the website more recently. This is the new format we have, and we do posters and other things. Social media completely integral to what we do. It allows us to talk to the people who are interested in our books, who buy them. It's the most again, I don't think we'd survive without the dialogue we can have with people that use social media. Twitter and Instagram really important. And what was interesting was a big publisher came to see us. He said, "Oh, you guys are doing something interesting. Can I come and see you?" And we thought, strange. One of the first things he said is, "I like your advertising." I said, "We don't do advertising." But this is what he meant by advertising. Just the ability to talk about the stuff you do to all that you, it allows, if you like, it's narrowcasting. It allows, social media allows you to speak to the people that you're, because you have to consent to be interested in this. So it's not like advertising, which just blitz huge expanses of the population in the hope that it picks up the occasional person who's interested. This allows narrowcasting. So again, go back to where I started, this idea that as designers we have skills that we can use for ourselves, for our own work and ambitions. So we kind of suddenly we had a publishing company, and we share the studio with Tony's company Spin, and there's a lot of kind of toing and froing, although they're quite separate companies. And Unit Editions people sit next to Spin people, and they work jointly on projects. I should just say that these tiles, this is Tony's obsession with collecting. These tiles, the Design Museum had a Wim Krull, I mentioned him earlier in connection to Total Design. Wim Krull, they had an exhibition, and the Design Museum made 1,000 tiles or something, and they sold 6. And so they rang Tony up and said, "Do you want them?" And he said, "Yes." So he tiled the kitchen with Wim Krull's tiles. But of course, being completely self-sufficient means you have to do a lot of stuff that most designers don't have to do. And so we have shelves in the studio of books. We've actually just changed this. We've actually now got it's not a distributor, it's a facilities company, I might say. So we don't quite have this problem anymore. We used to have trucks arriving, so we have to stop what we're doing, unload the trucks, and put things in boxes. Come on, you can do it. So we'd have deliveries of massive deliveries. These weigh a ton, and we'd have to do this with them. So because it's essentially a mail order business, we had to pack them all up, stick labels on them, and send them all over the world. So although there was a sense in which we were publishers, we were also warehouse people. I mean, we had to do our own warehousing, and that's part of this kind of part of the price you pay for being independent. Although, as I said, we've now got, funnily enough, a printer who has a brilliant what they call a fulfillment aspect, and so we don't have books delivered to us now. We have them to the fulfillment house, and as people order, they get sent out. And because the people who buy our books are usually designers, we make sure that the packaging that goes out is both two things. It's both really sturdy, because some people told us they don't buy books online because they always arrived damaged. So we make sure that the packaging they go out in is super strong, and that it's well designed, that there's a sense in which everything is considered. And again, that's because the people who buy our books are designers and they care about this stuff. So pretty much everything that goes into our books is, and I'll do an example of this in a second, but pretty much everything that goes into our books we photograph. We very rarely take stuff as it's given to us. We nearly always try to get the artifact, the thing that's been made, and photograph it. And we do this in a tiny cupboard. We also work in archives. This is in the Lubalin Center, the Herb Lubalin Center in New York, the Cooper Union. If ever you're in New York, go and visit it. They're always happy to see people. The Lubalin Center in Cooper Union. But they gave us this little, I don't know what, cupboard, I suppose, to photograph all Herb Lubalin's work. And archives are really, really important to us because a lot of our books are historical, not all of them, but quite a lot of them are historical. And in order for them to be feasible, the material has to be pretty much in one place. If we've got to go all over the world tracking stuff down, it's probably not going to be economically viable. But this is a really good example of an archive. This is Brighton. Brighton University has a 20th century design archive. And this is some of the stuff they've got. This is actually the archive of a man called F.H.K. Henrien. I'm going to say something about him shortly. And Henrien, I think, well, I'll say it when we get to Henrien. But he was the most amazing man, and he kept everything he ever did, and I mean everything. He kept the notes for the milkman. I mean, just amazing. But these files, we saw them earlier. These files are full of his life's work. So anybody who thinks they might, one day have a book of their work, keep everything. And it's just an amazing archive of British design in the 20th century. So I'll just say something here about how we design the books that we do. And everybody in this room, if you've designed a book or you designed a website, everything takes. Why does everything take 10 times longer than you expect? Why is design? Why are no shortcuts possible in design? Why does everything take so long? Well, it takes so long because we, like idiots, we actually care. We shouldn't care, but anyway, we all do. So this is the material we've pulled out of the archive I've just shown you. So these files produced lots and lots of images. And then the editing process starts. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this, so this is nothing new, but I show it to you because it's a huge amount of work. We might have 5,000 images. You can't put 5,000 images in a book, so it's editing, constantly editing images, discovering things, identifying the stuff that really matters. And something like this was his studio. This was Henrien's studio in about maybe 79 or something like that. Well, there's lots of people who went on to do really interesting things, people who started very important design companies. So we spent probably 2 days just identifying everybody in that picture. So there's 2 days just gone, just identifying people in one picture. Eventually we start on a layout, on a design, and that process is kind of endlessly tweaked and revised, and the green pencil comes out and things start getting moved, and eventually we're sort of inching towards a kind of layout that, and we have some very strong rules. And this goes back to what I was saying about the difference between the internet. Not so much with Henrien, but most of the books we produce, you can see everything in them online, no question. If you're prepared to sit there at your computer, you'll find most of the stuff in our books online. But what you won't find is, or very rarely, is you'll find it in context. So we're absolutely adamant that things have to be in context. So there's chronology to think about, there's relationships, stylistic relationships. Henrien started as an illustrator, but he moved into identity design. Anyway, eventually we're sort of getting close. We've maybe got one box that's got everything that we need in it. The first dummy is produced. We print all over the world, but a lot of our printing is in China. China is still a cheaper place to print than Europe, and the quality is, there's no question about the quality. The only downside is you can't really view on press, but we've had great success printing in China. And eventually you've got a proof copy. We start looking at the cover, checking materials, and eventually we get to a finished book. So I'm actually just going to say, how are we doing for time? Are we all right for time? I'm just going to, actually just going to say a little something about Henrien, because I think Henrien is well, the best thing to say is that I think he's the most important British graphic designer there has ever been. More important than Neville Brody, more important than Peter Saville. And he wasn't British, he was German. So, yeah. But I think everybody in this room who earns their living from graphic design owes this man a debt, because he basically professionalized graphic design in Britain. He said before he started working, graphic design was crayons and airbrush. But he professionalized it. He made it into a grown-up profession. And one of the things that I'm talking about change and how we all change. One of the things that I'd always done in my kind of thinking was I'd always kind of been resistant to design history. I thought, when you're interested in design history, when you're interested in history, full stop, you sort of lose interest in the present. And I was always terrified of not being kind of having a finger on the pulse and knowing what was going on. And I'd always resisted history. And Tony, who I mentioned earlier, was much more kind of engrossed in history. but seemed equally comfortable in the contemporary, and that was a big influence to me. And I suddenly became interested in, or sort of opened up, if you like, to history. And Henrion died in, when did he die? 89, I think. He died in 1989. But his story is absolutely amazing. And our position on doing historical books is that if we're going to do a book on a historical subject, the person or the school of design or whatever has to be relevant to us now. So there are people, really important historical figures, who we wouldn't do because you can't learn anything from them, or you can't learn very much from them. But Henrion, you can learn an absolute ton from. Another example of that, although he's still alive, is Ken Garland. We did a book on Ken Garland, and Ken Garland is a kind of model for how a designer can conduct their life and work. So Henrion, for me, is an absolute shining example of someone who we can all learn from. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about him. He came to this country at the beginning of the Second World War, and because he was German, although he was Jewish, so fleeing the Nazis, got to Britain, thought, I'm safe, and what did we do? We locked him up. We interned him. All Germans, even if you were anti-Nazi, all Germans got locked up. So poor old Henrion got thrown into an internment camp, but he remained completely upbeat. Eventually he got let out, and he went to work for the war effort, and he designed posters for the British war effort. And that was the beginning of his professional career. He started to be a professional designer. But, and this is where we can learn from him, he could design products. He was a product designer. And this is tell me this is not an Apple product. It's an Apple product. But he designed it in about 1950 something. And it was not the first, but it was absolutely, maybe it was the first, I can't remember. It was one of the first portable sewing machines. Up until then, sewing machines were great big things. Henry thought, why do they have to be like that? So he designed but he couldn't get it made because it was Britain, and eventually one of the Italian companies made their own, and Henry had missed the chance. But I just think what you learn from him is that although he was a graphic designer, a poster artist, really at the time, he wasn't frightened to use his design skills, design thinking, to design a bloody sewing machine. So he was also really, really, no question about, he was the first designer to really think about television. Because in the 1950s, television was run like it was the theatre. Everything was static, and there was no sense in which things would move. But Henry knew that you could get designers involved in television, and it would be interesting. Now it's full of designers, but when it started, it was run by people who understood theatre and didn't understand this new medium. Henrion did. So again, there he is, at the forefront of something new. This was his wartime work. This amazing poster here, and what he's doing here is he's committing the sin of making the dots massive on the poster. You didn't do that. You made the dots as small as possible. But Henrion realized that if you made the dots big, and certainly when you viewed them from a distance, they had more impact. So he was always, always, always interested in technical things. Again, something we can learn from him. Let's push the technology to make the work even better. He was brilliant exhibition designer. Very hard to do now what he did. Nowadays, clients and industries they just want to work with exhibition designers. They just want to work with information designers, web designers. But Henrion proved that if you have the right mentality, you could do it all. So an amazing exhibition designer. Some of it now I know we look at and think maybe it's a bit old-fashioned, but it was absolutely revolutionary. And then this is where he really made his name. He pretty much pioneered identity design, what we call branding probably, in Europe. It existed, it was quite well developed in America. People like Paul Rand were designing the IBM logo, but Henrion was, and he was using, he understood a great thing, and this is where the professional thing really comes in. He understood that if you're going to talk to airline bosses, if you're going to talk to big clients, You have to have, it's not enough to say I've done it because I like it. You have to have scientific reasons. You have to have commercial reasons, obviously, but you also have to have an understanding of why. You have to be able to explain why you've done things. So he realized that he would have to learn the language of management consultancy. And this, for me, is just one of the great, great logos of all time. The blue cement company, blue circle cement. And what did he do? Circle. But I mean, I just, you know, I mean, if that was done today, I mean, the lorry looks a bit old-fashioned, but the mark doesn't, the identity doesn't. And so he was an absolute master of identity. And this was, again, if anybody who was in London in the 80s, I think this probably vanished in the 80s. You can still occasionally see it. I sometimes see it on mantelcloths. This is the London Electricity Board. One of the things that Henry was doing that didn't really happen in design until well into the 90s was he was reading semiotics. He was reading about perception, how we perceive things. And this is the London Electricity Board that put electricity into homes in London. And you know, look at the lightning bolt that's in there. It doesn't matter if you don't see it, it's there, but it creates this most dynamic logo. And also, you can cast it in metal on manhole covers. He was the supreme kind of pragmatist. He understood that things had to work. You could come up with a great idea, but does it work? Does it work on when you cast it in metal on the pavement? So I just talk about Henry, and because again, as I said, I think he's the most important. So many people were influenced by him, really, really influenced by him. People like Wally Olins, who went on to form Wolf Olins. Wally Olins was one of his disciples. And I think without Henrian, we'd have got there in the end, of course, but Henrian sped up the professionalization of design. And so that's why I say everybody, all of us in this room, we owe him something. We do the occasional poster. And I'm just going to show you a few of the maybe slightly more recent books. This is a wonderful man called Lance Wyman. People know Lance Wyman? Lots of heads knocking. Amazing guy. Under-recognized in the design world, I think. He's famous for, I think it's the next slide. This is his studio in Manhattan. And Tony and I were always been fans, and somebody gave us an introduction. They said, we've mentioned you to Lance. He's quite interested in meeting because he's never had a book. So we went to his apartment and we up the steps, and there's two doorbells, L. Wyman and C. Walken. Christopher Walken lives downstairs, and they don't get on. And it's Christopher Walken's fault, because Lance is one of the nicest people that you could ever live. So Lance again is this amazing example of someone that we can all learn from, and that's someone that goes beyond just the basic practice of his craft. So I keep talking about this kind of multidisciplinary approach. It is harder to do now than it used to be, because clients want this kind of easy packaging of people. They want to know that you're an information designer. But Lance, what is interesting about him was he trained as an industrial designer. He trained in New York in the 50s. And this was the first design job that he did. It was an American pavilion. And it shows his combination of graphics, a very strong graphic shape, but it was also made as a giant construction. This was one of the world fairs in New York. But what he's most famous for is, this. This is his work for Mexico Olympics, Mexico '68, which I'm sure people know. If when you read any kind of survey of Olympic design, this one always comes pretty high on the list. It's my favorite, but there are some other good ones. And what was interesting about it was that he heard that. So there he is, young guy in New York. He'd heard that they were looking for an American, not looking for an American designer, looking for in Mexico City. They were looking for a sort of a professional designer, I suppose. And they asked some of the big New York design consultancies to go down, and nothing really worked. And then eventually Lance got invited down, and he was so poor he could only afford a one-way ticket. So he got on a ticket and he thought, I've got to get this job, I've got to get this job because I can't get back. And he did, he got it. And it's just a masterpiece of clarity and also really profound respect for indigenous Mexican design motifs. He became fascinated with old Mexican artifacts. And maybe this doesn't really show it too well, but he tells a great story that he was driving down Manhattan one day and he saw the first ads for the iPod, and he thought, hang on a minute. And his icons, now these are not for the Olympics, but his Olympic icons, I cannot believe that Apple were not influenced by his icons for the Mexican. I'm just sorry I don't have them. I don't think they're here. But check out his icons for the Mexico Olympics and then tell me that Apple haven't ripped them off massively. I mean, just, it's incredible. Color-wise, but this was, they used silhouettes. People remember that for the launch of the iPad, they used silhouettes and the white trails for the. You know. And then he was so enamored with Mexican culture and lots of Mexican people really fell in love with him, and so his next job in Mexico was the station icons for the Mexican Metro. Which was very small at the time. And I just think these are, we look at them and we think, yeah, okay, they're all right, they're interesting. But actually, they're astonishing, I think they're astonishing examples of compressed information. And they all mean something they're all relevant to the stations. You have to speak Spanish to get some of them, and there's also something really, really important about them too. You can verbalize them all. None of them are abstract. So people would say, I'll meet you at the Grasshopper station. And if that was an abstract form, they couldn't say that. So his theories of iconography and information design are rooted in this kind of really clear observation and understanding of how people process information. And he did that by going and standing in outside metro stations. Still in Mexico, he produced work for Mexican clients, again often using indigenous motifs. And this is, it's almost super graphics, but again a logo, but look how he's blown it up and made it into something really remarkable. And then when we were working on that book, we noticed on his shelves he had notebooks, rows and rows of notebooks. And we said to him one day, what are those? And he said, oh, well, they're just my log books. Can we have a look? And he said, yeah, have a look. And he keeps these amazing little black A5 log books. And every day since 1973, and he came back from Mexico, went to Mexico for the '68 Olympics, came back in '73. Between 1973 and 1982, he logged everything. Everything he did in the day, he'd put it in. If it was a business card, if it was a sketch, if it was a napkin drawing he did, them in. And we just looked at this stuff and we thought, this is fantastic. There's got to be a book here. So we made an 800-page book of his sketches. A really interesting thing has happened to this because we did it. We felt it was a bit of a risk because it's 800 pages, a lot of work, makes it quite an expensive book. Actually, we used Kickstarter for this. So, and what's been interesting, and again, this is where social media comes in, where you can talk to the people who buy your books or are interested in them. What happened was people were telling us that it was very refreshing to see this sort of work at a time when everything we're shown is polished to perfection. And there was a sense in which people were just saying, oh, thank God there's something that's not polished, or something that's not photoshopped to the nth degree. And amazing, I mean, we raised about 80 grand on Kickstarter, which funded the project, and it sells really well. And so there's a sort of original sketch. This is actually This is actually his logo. This is like it's actually it's the W from Wyman. This is what he uses. But it's full of the most amazing things. He worked on in Saudi Arabia, or was it Saudi Arabia? He worked on an airport identity. So it's quite fashionable now, and lots of people are doing it, looking at how you merge Arabic type with Latin type. He was doing it 40 years ago. Okay, a couple of things to finish on. This is originally, again, this is going to be one book, but one of Tony went to again another archive. Archives are really, really important. I keep stressing that. Tony went to an archive that had, he reckoned, wasn't quite true in the end, but he had pretty much every design magazine that there's ever been. And we spoke to the people who own this archive. It's actually in the design school at Epsom. Anybody know the Epsom College? Good school. And they acquired this archive from somebody in Holland. And it's basically a, this is the back cover. And again, we can do things like that because we don't have to sell it, we're not sold in shops. This is the front cover, but it doesn't say what it is. If we were going into, we are in a few shops, but we don't have to play those games that you have to play if you're going into the retail environment. So the title's on the back, and the title is 2 volumes. I said Design Magazines, Journals and Periodicals, 22 to 73, 74 to 2016, and it's basically a survey of design magazine covers. And what's interesting about it is, I mean, some of them are great, but you get this amazing kind of, if you go from 1922, and there were some before 1922, but we haven't got those, up until came out a year and a half ago, 16, last year, you can you get this amazing fast-track view of design trends and design stylistic changes. And you just, I don't know what dates, I can't remember all the dates, but we're coming, this is 91. So anyway, I just think it's a kind of a way of showing design trends. So I'm going to end on this. This is Paula Scher, and Paul is really still active. She actually, when we said to her, can we do a Paula Scher book, she said, yeah, but I'm not dead yet. And because she thought we only did dead people. But she's still working. But she'd already done a book. She'd done actually an amazing book called Make It Bigger. Really good title for a design book. And it's an amazing book, actually. It's a very sort of frank account of what it is to be a graphic designer. But we felt what Paula needed was a book that was done by somebody looking at her from a distance. And she said yes. And then there was some sort of tense moments where I could see she was reluctant to let go. But eventually she did. Eventually she said, look, you guys do it. And so we did. I think it's 500 pages, and it's a kind of complete overview of her work, but not from her viewpoint. And I interviewed her, so there's a long interview in the book where she talks very, very frankly and honestly, mainly about, no, not mainly, she talks a lot about what it's like to be female in the design profession. And she started in the 1970s. She started working for, have I got something? No. She started in the record business, a super male world, a hyper male world, and she found it very difficult. But she's now a senior partner at Pentagram, and she's the most wonderful role model for for all designers, but especially for female designers, and yet she is completely resistant to the idea of being a sort of feminist icon. It's not that she's not a feminist, but she's completely against dictating to other people how they should behave. And her view is, judge me on my work, not on my gender, which is interesting. And there are, I know some feminist designers who think she's she's betrayed the feminist design cause, but her view is that she's not a great joiner, Paula. She's a strong individualist. Anyway, so this is a current work that she's doing. This is work that uses processing. It's the Type Directors Club of New York, and she designed a set of letter forms that change infinitely and yet still are recognizably from the same form. She's great environmental design. This is supergraphics. She does supergraphics. She didn't even know what supergraphics was, but she was doing it instinctively. This is the Bloomberg building, and each floor has got this giant number that spreads all over the place. And one of the interesting things she does is, and again, this is why I think she's absolutely remarkable, is that she's one of the few people that combines high-end commercial design. She works for Microsoft. She works for big companies, but she goes to a house in the country at weekends and designs amazing maps. If you don't know, I don't have any here, but just check her maps out. They are the most astonishing things, all hand done, intensely detailed. And a lot of designers, some very successful designers, talk about how they're really artists these days. Well, she does it, I think, better than anybody. She combines commercial graphic design with artwork. So I'm going to end with this guy. He is definitely dead. Anybody know who this is? This is William Morris. And William Morris said, "The picture book is not perhaps absolutely necessary to man's life, but it gives us such endless pleasure, and it is so intimately connected with the other absolutely necessary art of imaginative literature that it must remain one of the very worthiest things towards the production of which reasonable men should survive." And it's kind of my view about books. I think books are a really essential part. There's many arguments as to why they're redundant, but for some reason they stick around, and I like making them. Thank you. Do you think you saw a house style?
Quite
Yeah. Is that house style, or is that just good design? Yeah. I think that there isn't a house style, but there are some principles that it goes back to this idea, and I didn't really kind of finish off what I was saying. The problem for me with so much online design is it's templated, that you can't break the pattern. And most of it is, if you're looking at blogs, for instance, it's a long column. And I'm not in the least bit anti online, and I couldn't live now without the online world. But I think when it comes to art and design, the printed page, that double page spread, allows you much more freedom and dynamism to make the relationship between text and image really powerful. So that's fanatical. There's certain things that are house styles. We never square things up. If it's a book, we show it as an object with a little shadow, because this stuff wasn't squared up. It was a book. Or if it's a poster, we try and show that it might. Occasionally, sometimes posters get damaged, but we usually leave that in. So there are certain principles, and also I believe that text and image should sit. So you're reading something, you've got to turn 30 pages to find the reference or something. I'm passionate about making sure that text and image have a comfortable relationship. So I would say there isn't a style. I mean, I could think of two or three. There's a couple of. This one's a contemporary typography book, and that's you wouldn't. I'd be surprised if you felt it was anything like the Henryan book. So. I don't know, and I don't think anybody else knows. I think I mentioned that I don't feel pessimistic about it because we've had these other kind of eruptions. Maybe this is on a different scale, but I just think that designers have enough mental agility to cope with whatever it throws. Maybe it just takes all the drudgery away from, maybe there's a command, maybe there's a verbal command that says, clean up 30 images, and so we don't have to spend, and we spend hours and hours and hours in Photoshop color correcting, so that things look as like the original as possible. Maybe there's an automated tool that will do that for you. I mean, there's already stuff out there that you can call AI. There's a web developer, quite a big web developer that claims to be using AI. There's people who say it's not, and then there's something called Canva, which is Australian. Yeah. So it's coming, but we have to be smart. There isn't an industry in the world that isn't faced with this problem of automation. If something can be automated in the future, it will be. Whether that's, I saw a great thing on Twitter the other day, a robot bricklayer. Fantastic. It just built a wall in no time. Amazing. So is that the end of bricklayers? I bet it's not. But all of us have to be aware of it, because it will come very quickly. And I go back to that thing about the Apple Mac. I said to my partner, I don't know, you can't computerize the design process. Bloody can. So I don't know where it's going, but I do know it's coming. Sustainability is important in every aspect. This bottle, what am I going to do with it? I'm just going to throw it away. I've just moved house actually, and needs to get rid of a lot of stuff. You can't just get rid of it anymore. You've got to think about where everything goes. So I don't necessarily think I think it is a design issue, but I think it's a life issue. What do we do with the stuff that we don't need anymore? I can't say our record in sustainability is that good. We often use paper that I suppose would fall foul of kind of strict sustainability issues. But my feeling is that people don't throw books away, generally speaking, and we're a micro publisher. Now maybe I'm just getting out of jail here, but sustainability is important, but it's not what's the phrase? A dog's just not for Christmas. It's sustainability is not just for designers. It's for everybody. But it's important, really important. And I sometimes sort of have conflict with some of the designers on this, because I think things like this is what's it called? This is vinyl. Yeah. And I think some of that stuff I would be happier not using, but I live with it because we do it on quite a small scale.
So I mean, like, not just on your company, but where do you see this going in the future? If you see it going in another direction?
Yeah. Well, there's an irony, isn't there? Because people were saying, let's get rid of print because it's ecologically more, we have to cut down trees, etc. But then the energy used in these giant server farms that Apple and Google and Amazon uses up much more energy than trees. So I think, I'm sure I'm not answering your question very well here, but we have to think about it in all aspects of life. And that kind of it's a sort of paradoxical thing that, electronic, great. You constantly, things that you think are ecologically good turn out not to be. So it's like diesel. Everybody bought diesel cars 10 years ago because they were told they were ecologically better. They've turned out to be the worst thing you can do. So I just think it's constant vigilance that we all have to exercise, but we have to exercise it as human beings rather than designers. And there are designers working in, I know some really good designers who are working in that area. All their work is around sustainability. It's a design studio called Thomas Matthews, and Sophie Thomas, who runs it. Her whole reason for getting up in the morning is to find ways of functioning within design sustainably. Oh, okay. That's a really good point, and that allows me to say something that I kind of wanted to say earlier. So anyway, I've shown you some design historical books. I think the key to everything you've said is editorship, making sure that context is constantly reinforced. That you're just not showing eye candy; you are showing images, and I showed the group of designers, tracking those people down because they're all significant people. Now, 10 years ago. And I've worked with various publishers in the graphic design area, and they would say to me, "Oh, don't mention the history word. Don't talk to us about doing historical books because they don't sell." And I think that was true then. I think there was no interest in design, but I think the internet, and again, this is another paradoxical thing. I think the internet has created the hunger to find out more because you can find everything. You can find all this work, but it's context free. It just floats in this kind of cyberspace, and I think I find go to colleges and talk to young designers, and there is an interest in design history that was not there 10 years ago. It's astonishing to me, and I think the internet has bred that. It's forced people to think, hang on a minute, where does all this stuff come from? And I'm sure that's one of the reasons, again, it's paradoxical, but I'm sure that's one of the reasons we were able to survive. And that could be AI. That's the irony. That could be AI that does that makes a much more fluid, non-templated way of viewing. I mean, hyperlinks themselves are the most amazing things. I mean, just think about what a hyperlink is. It can take you to anywhere on the planet. So, the internet, God, it's amazing. But I think that this sort of obsession with templating things to make it possible for everybody, everybody to be a publisher. If you're on Facebook, those are the parameters. You can't change them. So it's a kind of templated. Paula Scher says Facebook is the new suburbia. It locks us into this little sphere. So, yeah, and there will be technology that disrupts the disruptive technology, no question. Yeah, I think, not everybody is fitted for multidisciplinarity. I agree with that. But I think maybe designers are better suited to it than, and we all know designers who do one thing and one thing only. I have students who just want to design typefaces. That's all they want to do. And you could question how wise that is. Anyway, AI will design typefaces, no question. I think it is a danger, but I think actually it might be also be an inevitability. And that's why I'm optimistic about kind of the coming automation thing, because I think designers will have the mental agility, as I said earlier, to cope with it. There is this thing that you can, I'll try this and I'll try that and never do anything very, very well. But generally speaking, I think designers are better suited than most professions to deal with this idea of having lots of skills.